displacement of Indigenous communities and the attempted erasure of cultures without acknowledging where we are having these discussions and what has happened and continues to happen on our own soil. So this evening, we gratefully and humbly acknowledge that we hold this peace-oriented event on lands that are the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Attawameron peoples. Land governed by Treaty Number 4, the Crown Grant of the Six Nations, also called the Holland Tract. Subsequent Indigenous peoples and international newcomers have been welcomed into this treaty in the spirit of peace and friendship. We wish to honor the ancestral guardians of these lands and waterways and show respect to the many Indigenous people who continue to call this land home and act as its stewards. So good evening, welcome here. My name is Laura Warlock. I'm here on behalf of Mennonite Action, along with my friend and colleague Kenneth Zawara. We're also here with Neighbours for Palestine, who will be introduced to later in the evening. Those of you who are here, who are part of the organizing committee, can you stand up for a moment and wave to good people? And who's like the Also, a few housekeeping things. One, washrooms, go back, go downstairs, and you follow it down. You'll be able to find, there's also an elevator just out and to the right of the sanctuary. Where is Laura? Laura, please have a wait. If you have any questions of the building and facilities, Laura is here and can answer your questions. Likewise, part of why I had the other organizers stand up, and you will met something at the table coming in, there will be photos this evening. If you are not comfortable with your photo being taken, we either have masks you can wear or flag down one of the ladies at the table out there, or Ken or Laura or myself, another Laura. There's everyone here tonight is Ken or Laura. Okay? The text thread was very interesting. So if you find a Laura or you find a Ken, you can probably help them tonight. Now, to contextualize where we are and what we're here for tonight, I want to acknowledge that today is Yom HaShoah, which is the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and it was not intentional when we chose tonight. The term genocide was created by a lawyer in response to what was happening during the Holocaust. It is out of that horror and the guilt of primarily European and North American nations that they created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and held the Genocide Convention, which laid out by law what a genocide is. And the entire international human rights law and international humanitarian law systems were built as a result of this. And it's a system that we've all grown up under and live under and taken for granted until a year ago. Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories are our litmus test, and we are failing. As Mennonites, for those of us here who are Mennonites, we tend to be non-nationalistic, but with an election coming up, it is important to know that Canada has played a cornerstone in the creation of the international human rights legal system. Most of the lawyers who built the system in The Hague in the 1940s and 50s were Canadian. We have a very imperfect history as Canadians when it comes to human rights. We have lots of room to improve. But who as a nation do we want to be? Do we want to at least try to be a global champion of human rights? Or do we want to be one of the nations who are currently actively shredding the system? Elie Wiesel, survivor of Auschwitz, an author, wrote, "I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must always take sides." Tonight, we take sides, not against Israeli people or even against any particular government, but we take the side of justice and of peace. We stand against oppression, murder, apartheid, and genocide. And we stand with all who suffer under this reality. Because human rights were built for all humans, no exceptions, so that never again truly will mean never again for anyone. Last note, before we step into our first hymns, the Mennonite Action Mass Call, for those of you who follow Mennonite Action and are familiar with the binational movement, tonight is a mass call where 1,000 Mennonites and friends from across North America will be joining. They start at 8 o'clock, we end at 8 o'clock. Our final hymn is going to be their prelude. We will be joining them live. Canada represent. We are small in number, but mighty of spirit. And that you don't have to do anything, but just so you know, we will be zoomed in to their mass call, and then you can all hurry home to join the call yourselves if you like. Thank you very much, and thank you, Carol and Weaver, for leading us in music tonight.
Okay, let's go to 412, unless you know it by memory. My soul cries out. And our guitarist has just disappeared. Let's see if he comes back. Oh, miracles never cease to amaze me. Okay, all right, my soul cries out. Would you be happier standing? All right, and if you want to dance a little bit, move, please. I probably will. Same key. Okay, we'll sing verses 1, 4, and 5.
really harmonize. Wow, that was beautiful, everyone. So I grew up in the Presbyterian Church. My name is Laura, and I'm really happy to be here today. So I'm from Neighbours for Palestine, Waterloo region, and we are a group of neighbors who have united together to pressure our governments to stand for justice in Palestine and also end Canadian complicity in the genocide in Palestine. And so we will be talking later a little bit more about what we've been up to. But I would also like to speak about my own personal time in Palestine before we invite our guest speaker up today. So I'd like to ground us in the realities of what's happening in Palestine today with a specific focus on Gaza. I had the privilege of traveling to Palestine a few times, visiting organizations working for justice and peace, and I was actually able to get into Gaza for 24 hours in 2008. So this was the year after Israel's blockade began, and this is a photo of me at the Erez crossing. So as many of you know, Gaza is often referred to as the world's largest open-air prison due to Israel's full control of land, air, and sea borders. It's also one of the most densely populated areas in the entire world. And because of Israel's control, over 80% of Gazans rely on humanitarian aid to survive. So since I've been there, it was a while ago, Israel has carried out 5 large military assaults in Gaza. So in 2008, later that year, in 2012, 2014, 2021, and now on a scale never seen before. So we have all watched in horror over the last year and a half as the Israeli army has committed massacre after massacre, bombing and targeting churches, mosques, refugee camps, neighborhoods, ambulances, hospitals. These are places that are supposed to be protected under international law and places where families were seeking safety. The unfortunate reality is that nowhere is safe in Gaza. So when I was there, I traveled with the Near East Council of Churches. I visited UN schools, hospitals, and nonprofit organizations, and I actually bought this scarf in Gaza City from the Atfaluna Society, which is an organization that runs schools and programs for hearing impaired children. And so they also run an income-generating project for women where they make and sell these beautiful traditional Palestinian embroidered crafts. A year ago last March, it was destroyed. So here is a photo of Israeli soldiers proudly posing in front of the school after destroying it. Despite this, the Society continues its services to displaced families, serving the community with compassion and with dignity, while providing food, hearing devices, and children's programming to the millions of displaced families. So in this photo, the one on the left, it's a donkey and a cart. This was a very common sight that I saw. One of the things that Israel limits into Gaza is fuel. So many people took to traveling by carts instead of their cars because there wasn't enough fuel. On the right-hand side is the St. Philip's Church within the Al-Ali hospital compound. And it had been just bombed a few weeks before I arrived. While there, we visited with the surgeons and the doctors and witnessed the constant electricity blackouts that they consistently had to deal with while supporting their patients. In this church, we gathered together in solidarity, very similar to tonight, and sang hymns and prayed for justice and peace together. In October 2023, this hospital, Al-Ali Hospital, was bombed, and over 500 people were killed as they were seeking shelter. Since then, Israel has conducted thousands of attacks on healthcare facilities in Gaza, targeting every single one of its hospitals. Most have completely run out of medication, anesthesia, and medical supplies, and many are no longer functioning. So with the ending of the temporary ceasefire last month, the airstrikes on Palestinians continue, and humanitarian aid has not been let in over 7 weeks. So the situation is extremely dire. About 2 weeks ago, on the morning of Palm Sunday, this same hospital, Al-Ali Hospital, and St. Philip's Church were bombed again, hit by at least 2 missiles, completely destroying their emergency unit and main entrance. It was the last remaining functioning hospital in northern Gaza. The UN has called on all countries to immediately cease the sale, transfer of arms, munitions, and military equipment to Israel, warning that it violates international humanitarian law. As the catastrophe brought on by Israel's continued assault on Gaza grows, so many Canadian organizations have been consistently calling on the government of Canada to immediately suspend all trade in arms and military technology with Israel. But throughout this past year, the government has been sending very misleading messages regarding its exports to Israel. And so that's why tonight we are so privileged to have Ken from Project Plowshares with us today to set the record straight on Canada's arms trade with Israel through their extremely thorough research. So Project Plowshares is a Canadian peace research institute with a focus on disarmament efforts and international security, and the intersection of climate, peace, and security. Tonight, Ken Epps will share research on Canada's complicity in war crimes through weapons exports to Israel. So Ken is a former policy advisor at Project Plowshares, and his work focuses on the Arms Trade Treaty, Canada's annual export on military goods, conventional weapons, and control and global security. So let us welcome Ken Epps to the stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Laura. I'm very happy to be here. I guess I should clarify my situation. I'm a former staff person of Project Plowshares, and I'm speaking here both on behalf of Project Plowshares and myself. And if I get into trouble, it'll be when I'm speaking on behalf of myself. But my first trouble is I've been in so many Zoom meetings recently and have shown PowerPoint presentations there that I forgot that you don't actually get to see the slides when you're presenting them in a meeting like this. So I'm going to have to rely on some tiny notes here that I made of the slides, and forgive me if I stumble a bit. Anyway, Laura has set the context for the grim situation in Gaza. And what I would like to do this evening is to illustrate how Canada is involved through its export of arms. And I want to start with, I guess, just mentioning the name of the talk, I guess, is Lessons from Gaza for Canada's Arms Exports. I want to refer first to, next slide, please, 2 reports that have recently been released by Project Plowshares, and both of them authored by Kelsey Gallagher, who is the person now in the staff at Plowshares who's become very expert on Canada's arms trade and policy around international arms trade. The first one is a January 2025 report with the tongue-twisting title of Global Production of the Israeli F-35I Joint Strike Fighter. Sorry. But this is a very important, oh yeah, I can even hear myself now. This is a very important report for a number of reasons, including it gets to information that's never been released before. And it also has an impact not only on Canada, but on countries around the world that are involved in this very important and somewhat unique program that's run by the Pentagon, the Joint Strike Fighter, or the F-35. The report analyzes this complex program, which has already been called the most expensive military procurement program in history. And part of that is because it is a multinational program as well as one that's important to the U.S. The report draws on data from the U.S. government itself, so it's not making things up. It's using the data that is available, although it took Kelsey a lot of work to actually find that data. The contracts that Kelsey wanted to look at were associated with the F-35 aircraft, attack aircraft, that are being sent to Israel and that are being used extensively in bombing of Gaza. But these contracts are somewhat buried in the U.S. data, and Kelsey had to tease out what he could from what was available. They also are set up to be part of a global supply chain. Basically, it works so that any country that's involved in buying the aircraft gets a stake in producing some part of the aircraft, and that applies to Canada as well. 14 countries in all. Kelsey was able to estimate that the value of Canada's part of this program, and specifically for the sales to Israel, was around 121 million Canadian dollars over the years. And that has never been reported by anyone, including the Canadian government. And one of the reasons for that is, and the major reason, is that Canada exports, the Canadian industry exports its equipment for the F-35 to the US government, to the Pentagon, and it views that as the end user of the produced equipment, so that Canada does not take any responsibility for the export beyond the US. And I'll come back to that a little later. Next slide, please. So the second report is a more recent one, produced just last month by Kelsey, and it's about a very specific contract that was awarded in September of 2024. Again, awarded to the Pentagon, the U.S. Department of Defense, and the single supplier in Canada is a company in Quebec called General Dynamics Systems Ordnance and General Dynamics Ordnance and Tactical Systems, GDOTS. It was an award for propellant, basically explosive, for artillery shells, for 155 millimeter howitzer used by the Israeli Defense Forces. One of the things that's notable that the information that Kelsey was able to get about this particular contract was released 2 weeks after the Canadian government announced that it was no longer supplying weapons to Israel. This is back in September of last year. And of course, it became an immediate contradiction to that claim. The other thing that's of interest here is that this, like many contracts that Canada provides for the Pentagon, they're brokered by the Canadian Commercial Corporation in Ottawa, which is a crown corporation, a government-owned entity that helps with selling Canadian military goods overseas, or more commonly to the United States. So in this case, the Canadian government did not know that its own crown corporation was facilitating this contract. But the reason I wanted to identify these two reports in particular is because they are quite illustrative of the Canadian connection to the Gaza crisis. And in particular, and this is a quote that I have at the bottom of the second slide here, the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, EWIPA is a term used, largely airstrikes and ground-launched munitions, such as the 155 military artillery shells, have been identified as the primary driver of civilian harm events in Gaza. So here we have a direct connection between Canadian military industry and exports and the slaughter that's going on in Gaza. Next slide, please. So why are these arms control failures happening, often without the Canadian government even knowing? Well, we have to go back more than 60 years to an agreement made in 1959 called the U.S.-Canada Defense Production Sharing Agreement. And it has basically shaped the Canadian military industry ever since and essentially made it a subsidiary of U.S. military industrial complex, you could say. Canada, as a result, operates within the U.S. military market. Its main role is to provide some share in that market for Canadian industry. The Canadian industry is part of what is officially called the North American Defense Industrial Base. And that has meaning for Canadian industry in the sense that if the U.S. is at war, it can call on Canadian industry to help supply that, sometimes without even necessarily consulting the Canadian government. Many Canadian companies are subsidiaries of large American military corporations. That includes General Dynamics OTS, which was providing the propellant. Canada operates by providing primarily subsystems and parts for full American military equipment. So again, the F-35 is a good example of that, where Canada is providing many of the subsystems there. And quite commonly, and this is something that came up during my time at Project Plowshares when I was researching this situation, there were many years when Canada was producing more for the Pentagon than it was for the Department of National Defense. So the U.S. was by far and away the largest market for most years. The other thing that's interesting here is that the U.S. State Department requires export permits for, thank you for that, for many of the exports from Canada, to the point where some sales require both a Canadian export permit and a U.S. export permit. So since I'm pressed for time here, let's move on to the next slide, please. So how can we deal with this? Well, we need to close these loopholes that allow arms transfers from Canada via the U.S. to places like Gaza, where they're being used directly in war. And being used not only in war, but without necessarily the permission of the Canadian government. And we know, as Laura's already pointed out, Canada is obligated by international agreements, including the Arms Trade Treaty, to end exports when there's a high risk of international human rights and humanitarian breaches of law. I'm just going to go a little bit quicker here. So the final point that I really want to make here is that this has been a long-standing situation, over 60 years now, between Canada and the U.S. We now have a very changed situation with regards to the U.S. administration under Trump. And we can no longer assume that, as has happened for so many years, what's in the U.S. interest is in the Canadian interest. And this has kind of been the fundamental assumption around Canada providing weapons to the U.S., is that there's no light in between what Canada wants and what the U.S. wants. Well, clearly now there is. So we have an opportunity to re-examine the situation with the U.S. Last slide, please. And there's two proposals that we would make that could assist with that re-examination of the relationship between Canada and the U.S. on arms transfers. The first is a parliamentary committee that specifically looks at Canadian arms exports on an ongoing basis. And I've given a number of examples of how that could happen on the slide. And the second is a full study of Canadian military production and exports, with providing recommendations around some of the problems that I've identified. The last one of this and the only such study happened in 1991, so more than 30 years ago. And the reason I know that is because I participated in it. And we made recommendations then that included such studies should occur about once every 5 years. And of course, nothing has happened since. Final slide is for questions and comments, and I'm not sure when that's going to happen. Okay. Okay.
All right, we'll start with some of them as they come up. Ooh, good questions. Okay. Ken the Wise. What do you suggest individual Canadians do to lobby our government?
Well, I think there's always writing MPs about a situation that you've read about. One of the things that has happened recently is that there has been more information in the media, places like the Globe and Mail, CBC News, and so on, about the situation of Canada and its supply of arms to the Israeli forces that are then using them in Gaza. So, I mean, I think writing to your MP or to the Prime Minister, whoever that might be in a week or so, and drawing attention to your concern about the situation. I think also it's, you know, if you do remember the recommendations that we just made, that Canada have some parliamentary process to review Canadian involvement in shipping weapons around the world, I think that's not a bad idea either, to be honest. Yeah.
Can you go back one slide so we can look at it again? Thank you.
Yeah. So hopefully you can see that the two key points are the ones that are colored there.
Is it on the website?
Unfortunately, not yet.
There is, however, a newsletter the Project Plowshares produces, is it monthly?
Quarterly.
Quarterly. And they're at the table at the entrance. If you notice them coming in, please feel free to grab one. It includes, the most recent one includes an article directly related to what Ken is talking here tonight about. Thank you. Now, obviously, we're not going to get through all the questions, but we're just going to go through. It's like, you know, spin the balls with bingo. This is similar to that question in many ways. How do we get the Canadian government to cancel the loopholes, to close the loopholes, in essence?
Yeah, again, it has to be pressure from constituents and people, Canadian people. I think a good start would again be if we can get at least a parliamentary process to review regularly what happens with Canadian arms exports, and that always provides an opportunity whenever that committee meets or whenever it issues a report for Canadians and more directly politicians to recognize that something needs to be done, or something should be done about Canadian exports.
This is a good segue into this question. How likely, and a rather timely one, how likely is Canada going to move towards getting out of this arrangement with the U.S.?
Well, I think it's now is the time, if it's likely at all, to be honest. I think Canadians and, not just Canadians, of course, many other peoples around the world are recognizing that the U.S. isn't the friend they thought it was. But I think for Canadians in particular, to be around the issue of arms exports, we've been so integrated for so long in the production of weapons with the U.S. system that we forget that we can operate independently. And in fact, not only is it good from the standpoint of not getting involved in places that the U.S. wants to send weapons, and I think we're going to see greater divergence around that as time goes on if we stay with what we have. But also we can start looking at what does Canada need? We need peacekeeping equipment, we need search and rescue equipment, we need icebreakers for the north, that's been talked about more than once. But I mean, this is all equipment that I think we could commonly say is important for Canada. And we can start looking at that rather than feeding the US system.
Again, a theme this evening. Canadian political landscape is changing. Any thoughts about future reception to input from plowshares and other organizations? So I'll amend that too to say with an election coming up, this is a nonpartisan event. Do you find that certain candidates or parties, and you don't have to get into names, but are more receptive or more open to hearing from you?
I think it really does vary with time, and I can talk about that because I spent a lot of time at Project Plowshares. I mean, there were MPs in all parties at different times that had a really strong interest in what was happening around both production for Canadian forces as well as export of weapons. I think that can return, but it has to be an issue that Canadians themselves are interested in. I think, the Gaza situation clearly has brought that to the fore, and we have to take it, we have to note that as something that needs to be addressed because of what is happening in Gaza.
Thank you. And just look at the time. I'm going to ask you one more, rather arbitrarily, but these other ones that we didn't get to answer, I'm going to give them to Ken, and if you're able to write a quick answer, we'll send them out to people who attended this evening.
Okay.
So this last question, there's a lot of political momentum right now to meet these arbitrary NATO spending targets. Does this just fund weapons contractors with our taxes, or is there a cultural benefit there as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting question, and again, it comes at this kind of pivotal time. And this is where I'm expressing my opinion, not necessarily Plowshares. I'm convinced that the main reason that Trump is proposing this arbitrary figure of 2%, or it's now becoming higher, of GDP going towards military spending, is because he knows it assists the U.S. Military industry. I mean, most European and Canadian and Canada are buying military equipment from the U.S., and if they increase their spending, the likelihood is they'll spend it on U.S. Equipment. So there's that. But I think what we have to do is recognize that we may need to increase security spending if security means more than just military, if it means things like the climate crisis, dealing with that, if it means dealing with poverty, for example, which is a security issue if you are facing poverty. So I think if we have a wide understanding of what increasing security spending actually means, then potentially we could support it.
I love it. What a great note to end on, broadening our understanding of security. Thank you so much, Ken. We really appreciate it.
.682. Let's stay seated for this one as a prayer. First time I heard this was in Kenya. I swore it was written by an African, but I found out later on it was written by yet another Ken Medema. And when I met him some years later at a Mennonite conference, he was as touched to know that I thought it was an African song as I was to tell him that. So let's think of that continent right now as we do this song.
Send
Number 605, My Life Goes On. With the themes of tonight, let's just sing verses 1, 2, and 3. And what was standing there? My life goes on in the song of meditation. I catch the sweet of far of Him that is a new creation. No storm can shake my inmost calm, but to that rock I'm clinging. Since God is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It finds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? No storm can shake my inmost calm, but to that rock I'm clinging. Since love is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? What though my joys and comforts die? I know my Savior liveth. What though the darkness gather round? Songs in the night He giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, but to that rock I'm clinging. Since love is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing?
So we're at a really important time. Our federal election is on Monday, April 28th. We have 4 days, and political parties are going to be scrambling to try and get your vote. This is a moment where we can directly influence decisions that are going to affect Palestinian lives. This election, we're making Palestine an election issue in Waterloo region. What is Vote Palestine? Vote Palestine is a nonpartisan campaign that's been pushing for the rights and freedoms of Palestinians through this election. Vote Palestine and the Palestine Platform were built in collaboration with Palestinian communities and solidarity partners across Canada. It asks MP candidates to support 5 demands, which are grounded in Canada's obligations under international and domestic law. You can see the demands up there. I did not put them on my notes, so I will not be saying them. Locally, already 8 candidates have endorsed. We have NDP, Green, and 1 Liberal candidate. But we still have 4 days to put more pressure on. You can go to the QR code that's up on the screen and pledge to vote with Palestine in mind. When you make that pledge, it's going to automatically send emails to every candidate in your riding and tell them that their stance on Palestine, what's happening there right now, affects how you vote. We know that elections aren't the only way to advocate for Palestine, but they are important because we get to help decide who's going to be in the room to shape Canadian foreign policy and decide what legislative priorities are going to be put on the table and Canada's position on Palestine for the next 4 years. If we can't trust our politicians to take a stand against genocide, what can we trust them to do? So here's the QR code again. You can use it to pledge to vote with Palestine in mind. Spread it in your community to any businesses or organizations you know that would like to endorse the Palestine platform. And together we can make Palestine an election issue. Thank you.
Number 797, another Mennonite anthem. Let's stand for this one. Okay, we have another moment. Who wants a song? Who wants to suggest a song? Come on, get out of posters. Come on. Someone's got a song. We have one that we want to end with, but we need to wait until the Zoom.
Yeah, we're just waiting on the
Okay, let's go to 681. I'll just bang out a couple chords here. A little bit like the African Americans do. As we can. one that we haven't done?
About 706.
What about that?
706.
Okay. It's such a good problem. We never have time for too many songs. 706.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. You mind if I stay at the piano?
Well, thank you all so much for being here this evening. A couple more housekeeping things before we end with our closing prayer. A reminder that there are pamphlets aplenty for you to help yourself to on the table, both from Neighbours for Palestine about, I said both, Neighbours for Palestine, votepalestine.ca, Project Plowshares. I would also like us to give a huge round of applause to the people who made tonight possible. Erin on the AV from Sterling, thank you so much. Michael Fisher, who also happens to be my better half, doing our live streaming and video tonight, thank you so much. Sterling Avenue Mennonite Church for very graciously letting us use their space this evening. Huge thank you to them as well. Carol Ann Weaver for sharing her gifts with us and expertise this evening. Thank you, Carol. course, Ken Epps for coming, being our spotlight keynote speaker this evening, sharing his breadth of knowledge and expertise with us. Thank you, Ken. And of course, all our partners at Neighbours for Palestine, Mennonite Action, and all of you. There are a lot of places you could be on the first really hot day of 2025. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for committing to not forget our siblings in Palestine. And to close this evening, we have a prayer from Carol Penner, who is here tonight. She didn't know I was using her so shout out to Carol. Hear our cries, God. Invasion, occupation, and terror. Bombs, bullets, and missiles. Dead bodies, wounded bodies, orphans, bombs, bullets, and missiles. Prisoners, hostages, refugees, bombs, bullets, and missiles. Anguish, hopelessness, rage, bombs, bullets, and missiles. Destruction on the grandest scale, the earth cratered with hatred. Jesus, make it stop. Every war ends. Help us find our way to these currently unimaginable paths to peace. Give us the capacity to cry, not only for our own losses, but for the losses we have inflicted, not only for the inhumanity we have witnessed, but for our own inhumanity. Replace bombs, bullets, and missiles with food, hospitals, and shelter. The world reaching out with all it's got to feed the hungry, to heal the wounded, to house the homeless. Give us skilled negotiators and architects of reconciliation. Most of all, give us a will to drop our weapons. From the smoking ashes, a new forest begins to grow. Tiny seedlings of peace, watered with tears of hope. Go now in peace. Thank you.